Hello and welcome! In this video, I will be showing you how to create your own set of fursuit handpaws using my own pattern. I've designed it to be as beginner-friendly as possible while also being easily customizable for your own design. The paws shown here are the ones I'll be making, so let's get started. Here's what you will need. The handpaw pattern, printed and assembled. I've linked the download file below. Fur fabric. A half a yard is enough for single color paws. Material for claws. I use minky, but lycra or vinyl also work great. Material for paw pads. I use minky. Material for pillows. I use lycra since it doesn't get sweaty. Material for cuff. I use minky or lycra. Scissors. Pet clippers with a 5FC blade or scissors. A seam ripper. A sewing machine with a zigzag stitch or a needle and thread. A needle and thread. A pet brush. Pins. Wonder clips or pins. Stuffing. A pencil, a marker, or tailor's chalk. I'm using a metallic Sharpie here. First, we'll be starting off with the finger pieces. Using the inner and outer finger pattern pieces, trace 2 of each onto your fur fabric, being mindful of fur direction. Then, flip the pattern over and trace 2 more. Be sure to mark the small lines indicated on the top of the piece, as we will use these to line up the claws later. Place them as close together as possible in preparation for the next step. Cut around all your pattern pieces so they are all connected. Grab your clippers with a 5FC blade and begin trimming the piece, shortening the overall fur length to make the fingers more defined. I keep them all connected because shaving one piece is much easier than shaving 8 tiny pieces and gives a much cleaner result. Brush out any loose hairs with a pet brush, and they're ready to cut out. If you're using a seal fur or a short fur, you can skip this step. Repeating the tracing process with the palm/underside of paw piece, be sure to add the small marking lines at the fingertips. Mentally draw a line across the paw where you want the shaving gradient to start. Take 2 wonder clips and clip them in a straight line as a marker. Begin shaving just like the finger pieces. The gradient ensures a smooth transition when the handpaws are worn with a full suit and also matches the fur length of the fingers. Give it a quick brushing when you're done. Like with the fingers, you can skip this step if you're using a seal or short fur. With both pieces shaved, begin cutting out the outside lines only, leaving the paw pad lines intact. Remember to only cut the backing and try not to snip off any fur. Set them aside for now. Time for the top of paw pieces. Here's a quick overview on editing this pattern. I want the arm to be a different color than the paw, so I fold the piece in half, make a line, and cut out on that line. Next, proceed with tracing the cut pieces onto your fur, adding a small 0.2 inch, 0.5 centimeter seam allowance onto any cut parts. Add the marking lines and cut. Repeat with any additional pieces. Line up your seam allowances and clip them together. Now I will show you the special stitch to sew the paws together. Set your sewing machine to zigzag stitch and place your edge in the exact center of your sewing area. You want your zigzag stitch to catch the fabric on one side and not the other. Sew along your seam, keeping the fabric in the middle. This creates a clean and small edge that adds very little bulk to the inside of your paws. Okay, so we have the fingers cut out, the palms cut out, and the top of paws cut out. What are we missing? Claws. Take a piece of your claw material and fold it in half. Pin the pieces together to prevent slipping around. Draw out 8 claw shapes following the fabric direction, leaving a small area around each one. Why did I draw 9 here? With your sewing machine set to a straight stitch, start at the top corner of a claw and backstitch to anchor the stitch in place. We don't want them unraveling on us. Proceed around the length of the claw, securing the other end with another backstitch. Repeat for all claws until your fabric looks something like this. Cut out each piece, leaving a small seam allowance around the stitched edges. Time for stuffing. Turn your claw right side out and grab a small amount of stuffing and wedge it inside. I like to measure out 8 equal pieces before I begin so they all end up the same size. Secure with a wonder clip and let's head back to the machine. Using the same technique we used on the seam before, zigzag across the opening to hold the stuffing inside. I like to sew all my claws together under the machine, like a sausage link chain of claws. Trim them apart and your claws are ready to stick in your paws. So, remember that little mark I mentioned before? We will now use this mark to line up the claws. Line up the bottom of the claw with the mark and clip in place. Then, clip the rest of the length together, pulling the claw to line up with the fur until it's secure and ready to sew. Repeat with all fingers and claws. Zigzag stitch across the seam, pulling out the clips as you go. Paw pad time. Make a small incision in the middle of each paw pad outline on your palm piece. We will use this hole to stuff them later. Grab a 10-inch or 25-centimeter square of your paw pad fabric and lay it face down, being mindful of the fur direction. Lay your palm piece on top of it and pin it in place. Do your best to not pin any wrinkles into it, but if you have trouble, try pinning smaller pieces separately instead of one large piece. I like to be secure, so I go a little heavy on the pins here. With a straight stitch and matching thread, sew along the lines drawn, keeping the paw pad material smooth underneath and stopping and turning when necessary. Remove pins if they get in your way. Repeat for all paw pads, and here's what it should look like. And here's what it should not look like. Some fabric got folded over on this one. No problem. Grab your seam ripper and rip out the problem area, being careful to avoid the fabric. Stretch out your paw pad material as much as you can so it lays flat and sew across the seam ripped area. There we go, much better. For an extra level of detail and dimension to your paw pads, draw 2 lines on the corners of the palm pad and sew them, backstitching to make them secure. With your paw pads sewn, it's time to cut them out. First, separate all pads, being careful to not cut the fur. With a fine point pair of scissors, trim close to the seam line. This can be finicky, so go slow and don't cut the seam line itself. And that's the palm pieces done. Time to assemble the top piece. Take, from left to right, 1 flipped outer finger, 1 flipped inner finger, 1 inner finger, and 1 outer finger, and line them up using the markers on the top of paw piece. Clip all of them in place. The marker should be between each finger piece. Zigzag stitch across all finger seams, pulling out pins or clips as you go. The tops and bottoms are done, now let's sew them together. Starting with the sides, line up the ends of the arm portions of the paws and clip them together. Then, take the marker at the tips of the outer fingers and line up the claw seam with them, clipping in place. Push the claw out of the way and tuck the fur into the seam as you go. Do this for each finger. Clip the outermost seams together. Since the clips can get in the way while sewing, I like to clip the finger seams individually or in sets of 2. This is entirely a personal preference, but I like to sew each finger in halves from the tip of each claw into the bottom of each finger so I can push the claw out of the way as I go. Clip down the sides of 2 fingers and sew all clip seams with a zigzag stitch. Go slow around the corners and be sure that you're grabbing both sides in your stitch. It's easy for them to slip and then suddenly you discover a hole when you put them on. Clip 2 more sides and sew them together, connecting with your previous seams and moving the claws out of the way if need be. Repeat for the last 2 seams. If there's any stray, small tufts of fur, give them a quick trim. Time to stuff the paw pads. Taking that tiny hole we made before, open it up and cram some stuffing in there. The more you cram, the bigger the paw pad. Grabbing a needle and thread, ladder stitch the opening closed. Sew in and out on one side of the opening, then in and out on the opposite side. Alternate back and forth, pulling tight occasionally until you've covered the entire length. Tie off your thread, I do it twice to be secure, and then stick your needle back in and out to hide the tail of the thread. Snip off and repeat for all paw pads. With all paw pads sewn up, it's time to turn them right side out. I do this by pushing each finger into the palm area and then push the palm area out. It looks pretty scruffy, so give it a quick brush to take out any fur trapped in the seams and clean it up. Now that the paw is done, it's time to make the pillows. Take a 20-inch by 10-inch or 50cm by 25cm piece of fabric and fold it in half. Trace 8 finger padding pieces, leaving a small area around them. Anchor each one down with a pin. Just like the claws, backstitch the openings and sew around the shape, leaving the straight line at the end open. Cut all and turn all right side out. Stuff each one with your desired amount of stuffing. This can change from person to person, depending on how big your fingers are and how snug you want it to be. So test one by stuffing it into your hand paw finger first and seeing if you like the fit. I have small fingers, so mine are fuller than most. Tuck the tube opening in and clip it just like the claws. Zigzag stitch across the top to secure, and you're done. With all your pillows done, stuff each one into each finger. If so desired, take your clippers with your 5FC blade and give the paws a quick trim over just to tidy up any stray fluff or to give you some more definition. I had a few bits I wanted to clean up here. And now for the final touch. Let's create a cuff to hide the raw edge of the opening. Take 2 pieces of fabric that are 13-inch by 2-inch or 33cm by 5cm. Fold the edge of the strip over and place the strip face down against the fur. Clip in place, then clip around the entire opening. The edge is folded over to hide the raw edge in the final cuff. When you get to the end, lay the raw edge on top of the folded edge and clip both in place. Now when you fold it over, you have a nice clean edge. Sew around the entire opening with a straight stitch, removing the clips as you go. The space between your stitch and the edge is how wide your cuff will be, so go in more if you want a bigger cuff, and stick closer to the edge for a smaller one. Fold the cuff over and brush away the fur from the seam line. Next, fold your cuff over the seam allowance and secure it in place with a clip. Very carefully, line up your needle with the seam between the cuff and the fur and start sewing, holding the fur down to keep it out of the way and going slow. All that's left is trimming. Cut close to the seam line on the inside of the paw and remove the excess fabric. The seam is hidden by the fur, leaving a nice clean finish. And with that, you're done! Go forth and enjoy your new Handpaws, and thanks so much for watching!